Is AI making software development better or worse? That's the question I'm asking today's guest, Gregory Lind. He he's the CEO of Buildly, a four-time startup founder and the author of Radical Therapy for Software Teams. And he has some strong opinions. Greg believes that most teams
the Pacific Northwest and Portland, Oregon very well, you'll know that there was a time here in the 90s when I was first starting that almost everybody was in a band. A lot of people were then in the Web 2.0 and the .com bubble, also software developers. And a lot of my friends that I grew up playing music with, we also worked at software shops. We worked at startups, we worked at agencies, and you'd go to shows and you'd see people there that you had worked with or was in a meeting earlier the week. The parallels in terms of working as a team, especially back then, if you've worked on an agile team, especially recently, you work as a group, you have to be able to communicate well and be able to, a lot of it has to do as you get into the more leadership roles as well, or even the old scrum master type roles, which a lot of people still use. A band leader, especially if you're playing jazz, or I did a lot of professional gigs as well as played in bands, and that band leader role and being able to almost intuit what's happening with folks. You almost have to play that role of therapist and manager and everything else in those same roles, a band leader as well as in a software development team. But just in general, the number of folks that came from music and into software and vice versa, there's definitely some connections there. It goes beyond just the typical left brain, right brain thinking. It goes into the mathematics of music, and that's what attracts a lot of folks without knowing it. It's a subconscious thing. And then as you get into the ability to be creative and control software, it's the same thing. You're understanding the mathematics of it, but you're also coming up with creative solutions, especially hopefully early on you as you learn and you're becoming more structured in your creativity. But it's very similar to playing in a band, playing music in general.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I used to be musically oriented as a kid. I lost that growing up. I just released my first album today.
Nice.
Thankfully, AI has given me the ability to actually allow my lyrics to now actually get out there because I was never able to create the noise that I actually wanted.
Oh, interesting. That's
Now
cool.
I've also got a musical side to me that I can explore and do things. It's
That's
quite
very
nice
cool.
because I'm boiling down my research papers into music now.
Oh, that's good. I saw it was in the 2009 or 10, one of the OSCON events here in Portland, Oregon, which was the old O'Reilly open source convention that was the biggest thing in software in Portland for a long time. I saw a software developer who had written tools to create MIDI connections and then be able to live code music in front. And he did this. There's probably 800 people in that initial room, and it was just amazing to see that. And it's a slight evolution of what AI is doing now from that. But yeah, it allows people that creative. And it's probably not the same in Canada as it is here in the US, but a lot of the arts programs and music programs are cut here, and that creativity is getting lost and originality. You look at what happens in software now, and especially as we move forward with more AI tools and more AI writing code. AI is not writing code per se, it's copying code. It's not that much better than copy and paste from Stack Overflow in most cases. What it is doing is it's learning from everything that we do. We stop creating new software, we start getting into those creative ideas. It's not going to be creative. It's just going to keep copying and redoing what we've already done. It might evolve it slightly in certain directions, but for the most part, if we aren't actually interacting and learning from AI and helping it get better and creating our own contribution, software and creativity is going to become very boring. Not it also limited in terms of what it can do. It will hold us back.
That goes into your passion about time. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, or what you're actually elaborating on?
Well, we started off early on as a platform to combat the low code and no code tools. We built those with our open data tools. Evolved into product management as well. What they're doing is they're taking existing code, and software developers do this. If you've ever used Copilot inside of Visual, sometimes it will go in and write code inside of other pieces of what most of these platforms are doing. They're doing it in a slightly more structured and hopefully restricted way. They're building at best proof of concept, and they're doing that from copied code. They're doing that from their own rules around how it gets implemented. And then you end up trying to get, at some point, a developer to look into that code. And then a lot of times they're going, okay, this part makes sense, but this is spaghetti. I don't know what this is. And then you're trying to go through and fix it. And you end up spending more time catching somebody else up and how to get that thing done and paying for that review of that code than you would have if you had just started with something a little bit simpler and hired a software developer. That's really the fear, what software developers fear, is that the CEO or the product manager gets into these things, starts to use them, builds these tools, and then they hand it off to the software developer and say, fix this. Instead, as we always do as software developers, we always want to be involved at the early steps. The earlier, the better, to help with architecture decisions, what types of reusable code we can use, and libraries. And that's where a lot of this gets lost. Is now the real danger to me is building a proof of concept without thinking you're building a proof of concept. Instead, you think you're building an app that you can deploy somewhere, and then having to find out reality later on as you try to scale it or even use it in some cases. That's where the magic button fails. And that's where we're trying to hopefully keep AI as a tool and not as a replacement for the entire team.
Can you explain how your platform does that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. It's really a focus on, initially for the software developer, it's about a focus on education in terms of how can I use AI to get better, not how can I use AI to do my work for me. I admit I'm the laziest of software developers. And to me, that's a good thing, right? You want somebody that wants to automate everything and wants to do as much of the repeatable patterns as possible, but does not want to focus too much on that. Instead wants to focus on the creative stuff and get shortcut that as much as they can. And that's what our platform is built for. Initially, it's to help the product manager describe the business problem in a more technical solution. And it uses a lot of it's algorithmic for us right now, but it's also AI. And it uses that to speed up that process so that they can then see the technical documentation really quickly and keep up with the software developers that are already using AI tools and want to move really quickly. And then the last part of it is for the software developers to understand, use it for a particular set of redundant functionality that you don't want to do. If you're building a model, let's say in Django, and you want to be able to use that model to create a REST framework endpoint, right? The hardest, or not the hardest, but the most boring part of that, right, is creating the serializer, creating the filters and adding the URLs. And it's the same step every time, and you're copying and pasting most of the time. AI is great for that, right? As long as you keep it within those confines, you can use it to do that for you. Get the boring work out of the way. But if you've then got to connect to a third party API and then manage data in some way, that's where you need to get involved and you need to start doing that. You can have AI help teach you how to do that if you don't know how to interact with those things, have it plan even some of those things for you. But don't let it write that code, because then you're going to end up with something that, again, is going to end up looking like embedded code with inside embedded code or spaghetti. It's just going to be very difficult for you to then fix it later on. So that's what our goal is we create an MCP that connects to our API, and that can then limit how much in Visual Studio or whatever it is you're using, how much you can actually use that platform to build out code for you. It gives you certain things that it can restrict, but it also can open up certain things for you. But it also makes sure that you're working on, which is my biggest pet peeve, is as a software developer, I've done this, and many of the software developers, you get into code and you start working on something, and then you see another problem and you start fixing that at the same time, or you start refactoring other people's code at the same time because it doesn't look quite what. Yeah, we've all done that. That's the part where it's going to help. It's going to make sure that you have an issue associated with what you're working on. It's not going to be too opinionated. It's not going to stop you from doing these things, but it is going to warn you, oh, hey, you're checking in code that doesn't need to be fixed right now, or it doesn't have an issue. Maybe make sure you have an issue somewhere associated with it, which you can do a lot of that already in GitHub or other places, but it's going to be a little more gentle and remind you earlier on in the process for that stuff.
More filter than anything else.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to help you with making sure that you're on task and that the organization's on task and that you're making those decisions early on and making those decisions based on what's already in the documented system. That's the goal. That's a few of the things that we do. There's a number of things that we do process related within that as well, but that gets down into our discussion around the death of Agile, evolution of Agile. And in certain cases, Agile, especially large enterprise teams, probably still works, especially if you're not using a lot of AI tools. Everybody has always had the same complaints about Agile, in that it still is a process that can get in the way. It's adaptable, and there's big A Agile, and there's just Agile. And what we focus on is being a little more small Agile and really looking at how do we adapt to change and do that quickly. That's where Agile can survive. But the larger processes, the Scrum processes, the weekly backlog or bi-weekly, all of that event really soon is going to go away altogether.
It's funny you mentioned that, because part of my career in the government was I started Agile in our department. Like, I was part of the initiative to start Agile in the government, and that was 2018.
Wow.
They just got on to Agile, and then we're going to go and rug pull them again. I appreciate that you're going at a linter-based way. The evolution of coders, I'm worried for the next evolution, because I at least learned all the basics. And I tell everybody, you should still learn to code. Still learn to code, because it's valuable. I'm glad that I do that, because I do AI websites. But if I was just a regular person, I would be running into errors all the time. I appreciate that you're hand-holding, not enforcing.
Nobody wants that. You don't want to. That's the problem with some of the, especially if you looked at even before that, if you go back to waterfall processes, big upfront design, it basically tells you everything you need to do before you even start, and you get limited and you get restricted by that, and you're not involved in the conversation. And that's that's always been the downfall of a software product, is communication breaks down. And then you don't have the developer involved early enough to say, hey, I could save you a whole bunch of time. We have a library that will do tables for you and put all these filters in, and it doesn't have to look exactly this, but it will do all of that functionality and save a whole bunch of time. If you're involved in those conversations about reusable components and libraries and things, you can really save a lot of time with that process.
It's funny you mentioned that, because one of the projects I was on, actually, I have to mention that it could also save money. One of the projects I was working on, they wanted to pay some company for this table a generic table that would augment as you put in the information.
Sure.
And I looked at them and I can build this. Give me a day. And I built pretty much the exact same thing, functions the exact same way. And I'm just saved you 10 grand for paying for that software.
Yeah.
It really is. If you have the coders in the conversation early, you're going to have great wins early on and late in the game because they're going to understand the entire process.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's really hard to build an application if you don't understand the business use case for it. Right. And then a lot of times you end up in blindly coding functionality that you don't even realize is not part of the platform or not part of the design. Limitations to both ways. As we start to evolve, the more developers and the business side work together, it's your product team and your software team together as one team. That's the goal for us. It always has been. Agile, even with its different chickens and pigs roles and all of these different analogies that they have, it still misses the point, which is that it needs to be one team. It shouldn't feel like it will be. The more AI continues to take over certain parts of our roles, it'll just take parts. It won't take all of these roles. Developers start to become more product managers and product managers start to become more developers. And there's nothing wrong with that. Having a cross-functional team that actually understands what everybody else is doing, the magic goes away a little bit for the product manager and the confusion goes away for the developer. There's nothing wrong with that.
I remember the time fondly. My team was close. We had access to the product owner and the stakeholder decision maker, the whole thing, and it was great having that small, tight-knit team that can go to anybody for information.
Yeah, imagine larger enterprise teams now and get as much done as they were with these larger teams. They need to be more directly involved because they can move fast now, that they can end up building a prototype in a day instead of 3 weeks or a month. That's where adjusting your process, adjusting the tools that you're using is important, but also making sure that when you were building that prototype, you're not doing it with AI borrowed code. It needs to be something that...
Very fair. I do want to get into your book here, Radical Therapy for Software Developers. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, funny. That came out last year. It was last year. Yeah. The sections that I dedicated to AI were mostly around ethical as a tool, ethically, but also from a consumer standpoint. When a user interacts with your whatever LLM, you end up not knowing how the users are interacting with it unless you're tracking certain things. Can learn from users interacting with it. So testing is difficult, but more important than ever. And that's how we started. It was a reaction to that. And then on top of that, again, what we've been talking about is this separation that has almost always been there of the business team from the software and government agencies for probably about 10 or now you've got business and software and they are all distributed all over the world and then scheduling meetings, having those. It's a waste of time. You just can't do it. How to use tools, Slack, and use issue trackers and in a way that includes everyone, marks decisions, and allows you to have conversations. That's really what a lot of that book is about. But it's also about just your own personality along with everybody else's. So you can, as a team, get along better, but also you're more productive when there's transparency involved. And the more we can share, not just with the team, but with users at the same time, managing even large enterprise projects as an open source project is possible. And it makes it so much easier for people to follow along and be part of that process. You don't have to make it public, but at least get your users involved at some level in that software process. And for startups especially, it's important.
Very fair. We have 5 minutes left. I just want to give you the last little bit to add anything we've missed or plug anything you want or anything else.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot in this discussion. AI and where it's headed and software especially. To me, the most important steps are how we're building those software applications and who's involved in that. And then the secondary, and or maybe even more important than that, is who's testing it and how are they testing it and how much of it is transparent. I won't get into the whole LLMs and AI should be open source discussion, just because that's heavily weighted in a lot of different directions. But what I will say is the things that we're building and the things that we're working on it building are focused on more transparency around how you build an AI and how you use an AI, but also how you develop your own tools and use those. And there isn't an application that we have looked at or built, and we've got a number of products that we've built out on our own that couldn't benefit from open source, right? And at least in a certain way. And the other aspect of it is the transparency around that process gives people confidence that if they're hiring let's say a small indie shop that's bootstrapped, and they're not sure if they're going to be able to, will this product still be around in 5 years? Well, yeah, because it's open source, and everything that we've built from the very beginning is out there. All of the issues are in the same repositories. That's really the focus for us, is both at Buildly and with our open source and nonprofit side, Open Build. We're training software developers and building products that are transparent and that are helping people to learn that process and adapt it to their business in whatever the best way they can.
I really appreciate that you guys are doing that, because transparency has been a problem for a long, long time, and I'm glad some people are working on some solutions for it.
Yeah. I wish I could take credit for it, but it's obviously it's been around for a long time. There's a number of, if you go to radicaltherapy.dev, you can see a lot of our influences or my influences in writing the book. But if you go to Buildly, you can see a lot of the use cases as well that we've built around that and how we use it. And transparency, there's a lot of organizations that want to do that. And there's a lot of startups that want to show their transparency around how they're fundraising and all of that. It's great. The more we can encourage, especially now where things are feeling like everything's closing in on us, and there's all these new regulations and tariffs and everything else in the US especially, it's more important than ever to be transparent with your users and with yourself and your team.
Very fair. Thank you very much. I'll make sure all of the information's in the description below. And to my audience out there, stay weird.